Hey everyone, it's Mary and Amelia here. Welcome to Real Conversations with INFJs and INFPs. This is season 1, episode 2. Let's do a little bit of quick introduction, huh?
Love it. Maria is an INFJ and the author and facilitator of the Integration Mentor Program, an MBTI certified practitioner and personality profiler, founder of Sumalov Academy of Human Integration and the INFX Project. She has written 2 best-selling online courses, The 4 People Within, which is an extension on Jungian work, and the INFX Unveiled, the INFX Deep Dive, and INFX Mastermind, which all show INFJs and INFPs how to live a more authentic and productive life. When she is not busy with work, which seems like all of the time, she is spending time with her partner, Peter, and their collection of beloved dogs and horses.
Thanks, Amelia. And Amelia here is also an INFJ, and she is a mentor who helps people become free of emotional abuse. And with her work, clients finally move on from what's been holding them back in their lives. She's a fully qualified integration mentor who loves helping clients transform themselves. And when she's not working, she's looking at her own self-development, spending time in her garden, digging out those carrots and celeries, I think at least carrots, reading, cooking, and walking her large doggo. So welcome to today's episode. So today we're actually going to talk about something a little bit controversial in the world, what's going on, and we're talking about politics, and we're talking about voting, and why on earth would anybody vote for somebody who struggles with empathy, compassion, and sympathy? And shall we start with some definitions first, Amelia? What do you reckon?
Let's do it. That way people know exactly what we're talking about. So, Maria, how do you define empathy?
Or what our perception, thank you, or what our perception of these are, because somebody else might have a different definition. So for empathy, for me, means your capacity to put yourself into somebody else's shoes and really feel what they're feeling and be with them in that space when they are feeling that. So it's almost like for me, it's more passive form of compassion, if that makes sense. That's my definition. How would you define that? Anything to add?
I think I think that definition was stellar. Empathy also to me sounds like in your head, like, oh my gosh, that must be so hard. Just really, like you said, really putting yourself in other people's shoes.
Yeah. Whereas I'm thinking kind of compassion, that it's an empathy that you show the compassionate, you show compassion to another person, saying things like, that must be really hard, trying to associate with what they're going through, trying to show them that you understand where they're going, what they're going through.
I completely agree. Keep rolling.
And sympathy is something that, to me, is something that offers, you're offering sympathy, which is like good thoughts and good, support, but you're not really necessarily getting emotionally involved in the process. What would you say about sympathy, Amelia?
I think that's a good definition. Honestly, I don't have a good definition of sympathy. When I hear of sympathy, I do tend to think of people who've had someone pass away recently.
Got it. Yeah.
To me, that's when sympathy typically comes out.
Yeah. It's almost like going through the motions of showing your sympathy for a person who's grieving. Am I hearing it right?
I believe yes. So yes. Okay. Thank you for saying that. And that's one reason why I wanted to define this a little bit more. It's like, well, what are these things? And I also think it's important because you don't hear a lot of INF types openly talking about controversial issues.
It's true. Yeah.
So I think this is also important for other people to hear who are possibly an INFJ or an INFP. It's like you can't have an opinion. You can have and disagree with other people, and that's okay. You don't have to absorb everyone's opinions.
Mm. And that's absolutely right. It's politics in particular can be such a polarizing issue. We've seen it more recently in the US with everything that's going on, and you were saying you had some news, political news, because we've been on a mentoring training call for the last couple hours. So what's your news?
So as of today, November 23rd, I saw an article from CNN that says that the Trump administration has issued the Biden administration a letter saying that the transition period can officially begin. So this is like the first step in the transition period. So it's nice to see some unification of both parties wanting to extend the hand, which is nice because it's been so the election was quite, I don't have the right word for it right now. It was quite different this year because Trump threw so many aspects of democracy out the window with questioning votes and saying he got scammed, which is totally against what all other presidents have done, and then going back and forth trying with the legal issues and all of that stuff, and trying to save his presidency rather than just understanding that it's part of the process. So that's been some good news at the top of the hour.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. That is good news. Just people coming together and actually following the agreed upon rules. And let's never forget that politicians actually are representatives of the people, which means that all of them work for us. Now, you're based in the US, I'm not based in the US, but all the elections in the US, especially to do with national security over there, all of it has global implications. So as much as people would, especially I know a lot of American people, a lot of my American friends and people that I know say, you're not from the US, you can't vote here, so you shouldn't have an opinion about it. But unfortunately, US, like any other country, doesn't exist in a vacuum, which means that you need to, that this is a global issue. So, whatever happens in Australia is a global issue. Whatever happens in China is a global issue. Whatever happens in Russia is a global issue. So yeah, unfortunately, even for those INFs who are tuning in today, if you're not living in US and you've been told you don't get to have a vote about it, if you don't have a vote about it, you don't get to have an opinion. That's not actually true. You can have an opinion, but understand that it's your opinion. And as long as you're not a citizen, you don't actually get to vote. So there are those little nuances that we need to keep in mind when we're talking about politics and when we're talking about, in particular, in this case, the US election of 2020. And you were saying that Trump had been throwing out a lot of or challenging a lot of the status quo around what's been done, but also actual laws, trying to change them in certain ways. And whilst that can be, and I've been talking to a lot of INF types about this, it can be very distressing for us when that happens. It can also eventually, when those safeguards are in place to protect the people, to protect the Constitution and to protect the people, when we do in fact have somebody who challenges those things, we need to make sure that we take the learnings now and implement more things to kind of so they're basically exposing the weaknesses in those constitutions and things that we can then fix and fortify the Constitution in order to, to go forward and make sure that it doesn't happen again. So there are positives to being challenged, of course, because you can find out different ways that you can fortify. So when the situation, so when life challenges us, we then learn new ways that we can fortify ourselves, and we can learn from those things. And there's always something to learn from even the people that a lot of INFJs in particular, in this case, INFJs, INFPs, do not like Trump. just because you don't like somebody, there's still a lot that you can learn from them. And I would certainly learn to be more assertive and more aggressive because of him, because the intolerable space that I find coming with references to sexual assaults against women, the consistent deafness to a point of my interpretation being a form of racism, the constant denial of or the passive and aggressive denial of challenges that other people, minorities might have. It doesn't work for me, but I'm not saying these are facts for everyone, that values that everyone should live by. These are my values, and I am good with that. So, Amelia, why is empathy important for us? Why should we have empathy?
Empathy is important for us because it allows us to see what other people are going through, and it allows us to recognize other people are struggling. So it's like it keeps us from being very insulated, all about me. This is how I am in my world. It's like, okay, well, what about other people? Okay, how does your actions affect other people? What are you doing that has a ripple effect on others that you aren't aware of? And it's really interesting to me because I find most INF types to be quite empathetic. And they can have a real challenge with President Trump because he is so not empathetic with like the children at the border with Mexico is just horrendous, and all of the trauma that's causing those families, and the fact that people aren't horrified and actually support his behavior to the point that almost 71 million people voted for Donald Trump again. That's 8 million more than 8 million more than he had last time, and people have seen his behavior. To me, this was a major challenge because I was like, do other people not have empathy towards other people, especially here in the US?
Yeah. Well, something I've noticed around that is too that it's difficult to hate when you're in a close proximity with somebody. So the more divided we are, be that physically, emotionally, how we think, the more further away from we are from each other, it's easier to hate on each other. Whereas, you go to the border and you see those kids in there, it's very hard to not you can't unsee it. It's right there in front of you. But if you're not going there, and some of our sensory friends in particular, if you don't see it for yourself, you don't believe it. You only see what you believe, you hear. Whereas a lot of INF types, we actually do intuit. How would it feel to be that child? You'd be feeling terrified, not knowing where your family is, not knowing where where your siblings are. If you're a parent, you don't know where your child is. How do you justify that, and how do you not get upset about it? And how do you not get upset about something like that happening? Something like that being created by the authorities, and then a lot of people getting behind those authorities. Like, how do you reconcile that? And that seems, and I'm not speaking for all INFJs, but that seems like there's an outrage. There's an outrage because people are marginalized. Children who've done nothing wrong are marginalized. And it seems to be all about numbers because, and I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories because I'm not into that. That's a whole different. This podcast is not about that. This is a whole different discipline. I will say though that if you get if private corporations get money for detaining those children, then of course it's in the corporation's benefits to detain the children. So we need to, I'm not saying that's what's happening, because I haven't seen factual evidence of that. But I'm also not saying that it's not happening, because again, I haven't seen factual evidence of that. But I'm saying is we need to look at why, like who benefits from things being done in a certain way. And the same thing goes for empathy. You know, when we're very empathetic people, we can look at, okay, how are my actions going to affect those other people? So how is my voting going to affect those other people? Okay, so it's not going to affect me, so I don't care. Now that shows that there's incapacity for empathy or compassion. And that can be very difficult for highly compassionate and empathetic people like INF types to accept.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point that just recognizing not everyone is wired like you, and people need to often see things to really fully understand what is going on, which is one reason why I'm grateful technology has changed so much, because people can actually, videos can show of these brutalities, especially towards African Americans. Like people can actually see it now. So there's no denial. You can't just look away when there's a video circulating. So it's terrible as it is. I'm so grateful for technology that's making it an undeniable truth of another example of low empathy with other people.
Yeah, it's right there. It's right there. You can't change it. Like, it is what happened. It's right there in front of you. Look at it, you know. It's painful to look at it, and you can feel the pain. You know, empathetic people like us, we watch these videos and we see it, and I'm crying just thinking about it now. You know, somebody being chased like a wild animal in trucks and shot, somebody being knelt on, somebody being shot in their own beds for not having done anything. All these names, we have to keep them alive in order to make sure that people are being held accountable. And that's something that I see in the US politics in particular. I've lived in different countries, so I've seen how different political systems operate. And what seems to be really lacking in US politics is accountability. You know, people promise stuff. They promise anything that will get them elected, and then they don't follow through, or, you know, or they say one thing out there in the streets and another thing in the court, or, you know, it's like there's no accountability. When will people start holding elected officials accountable for what they say? And what they don't say.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when it's clearly a situation where people should stand up and say, no, we're not going to put up with this. Why, for their political interest, is it okay that people don't speak up? Why is that okay? It's not okay. You are a representative of the people.
Absolutely. And Donald Trump made a good point of that he would say things and then come along later and say, oh, well, I was just joking. So it's interesting to see people trying to hold people accountable, but at the same time, they're completely avoiding it, which is quite frustrating and infuriating to watch at the same time.
Well, it is. And if we look at our sensory friends, again, who collect information through, you know, the five senses, hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, and so on, as opposed to our intuitive friends, the intuitive friends can see the person's not joking. And the sensory person looks at the person and believes what they're saying, doesn't even think that they could be joking. So now you have an intuitive person saying, well, that's a load of rubbish. And a sensory person believing that this is a fact because it's coming from an authority. and an office that means something. And now what? Now you have people who are fighting against each other until the person in the office again says, well, I was just joking. And now our sensory friends are going, well, what am I to think about this? And our intuitive friends are going like, well, that's a fucking lie. Sorry. So it's creating so much chaos. There's so much chaos. And it is to the benefit of the person. So I always ask who benefits from this chaos, and that's where we should focus. Like, why are people creating chaos? Yeah.
So, Maria, why? And maybe you've answered this a little bit, but why is empathy important to you?
Empathy is important to me because we don't actually exist in isolation. So if you look at a biological situation, so here's my scientist brain coming in a little bit. If you look at our biology, if we don't have empathy, let's just say we take the empathy part of our compassion part of our brain out and we just chuck it. We don't have empathy or compassion. In the modern world, it is likely that we will not be able to procreate. So we won't be able to have families, and that would basically end the human race, because the human brain has become this completely incredible entity that that has a lot of needs, emotional needs that have come with it. But if we take the capacity to feel empathy out of our brain, we stop connecting with each other, because we have these emotional needs, but we don't have the empathy to actually act upon those cues that we're getting and reciprocate, all those things. So biologically speaking, that's why empathy is important. But so we weren't meant to not have empathy. We were meant to have empathy. And on a more kind of granular level and political level, if we don't have empathy, we want to just continue to exist in our own confirmation bias, which means that we're not looking to learn something new about the environment. We're not looking to educate ourselves. We're not wanting to continue to expand our awareness of what's going on and decide for ourselves what facts actually are. Because if we don't have empathy, we just don't connect with others in a way that's meaningful. That's my political answer to that question. What about you? Why do you think empathy is important?
Answered this a little bit earlier, but like you said, we exist in a community, and we all actually need each other. And in order to really healthily and balance, and healthily to need each other in a healthy and balanced way, you need to be able to meet other people where they are, and give people second shots, and understand when people are struggling, and give people space when they need space, and be able to really relate to each other on a deeper level, to keep us connected, to keep us needing each other, to keep the tribe together. Otherwise, we can't exist out by ourselves.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into that tribalism piece a little bit, I feel. Where we can kind of go, this is my tribe and that's your tribe, and we shouldn't mingle, or the whole basis of anything that's different is scary. And as long as we don't have empathy, or unless we deliberately cultivate empathy, we can get really tribalistic, which again is something we've seen. We start to believe that certain people are more important than other people, which of course is never. We all have to go to the toilet. We all should pay tax, right? These are basic things that every person should be doing. So in that kind of a way, like you can't outrun IRS. That's just that's just how it is. But the thing is that you know, if we let our empathy dwindle and we don't proactively learn the skills of empathy, which is something they've done, I think in Denmark, they did a big study, or in Norway, where they started teaching school kids empathy, and it changed the whole classroom. Obviously the whole classroom vibe, but also the capacity for those children to learn other things. So that was really interesting. So I think there's like an educational component there as well for empathy, that if we don't cultivate it, that we genuinely just stop learning new stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what is something you would say to someone who is struggling with the lack of empathy in politics right now?
Well, in the US, what I would say is your president-elect is highly empathetic person. You may not like him. I don't agree with everything Vice President Biden or President-elect Biden stands for. There are things that I disagree with him, but at least I can focus on the quality of the person, the empathy that the person shows. Now, this is not because he's a Democrat, he's empathetic. And I just want to show that another person that was highly empathetic that I really appreciated and don't agree politically with in certain ways was John McCain, Senator John McCain. He was an incredibly empathetic person, and completely at the opposite end of the spectrum. And for those of you who know the U.S. History or political history, John McCain, before he became a senator and actually was working against Joe Biden in many ways, so John McCain was Joe Biden's political aide, as in not political aide, but the senatorial or the support person for, because he used to be in the Navy, and the Navy officers were assigned, or the Navy, people were assigned to different senators and different, representatives of the people to support them, to help them. So they were actually really, they had a working relationship before they were working against each other. So they were working together. And look at these two people working together who have completely opposite political views, and still they're able to come together. And in fact, I believe, if I'm not wrong, and fact check me on this, people, it was actually Joe Biden who introduced John McCain and his wife Cindy originally. So, or maybe it was Jill Biden. But in any case, you can see like there's so much compassion for each other, even in these very divided times. Why don't we be the leader of that? If it feels right, if it feels like it's something we can do, why don't we say, okay, enough of this division. I want to see you as a person so that you can see me as a person. Somebody has to be the grown-up in the room and say, I'm not doing this anymore. But I just want to say, obviously, if it's not right for you, don't do it. Really respect where you are in your personal development and what you need to learn. What about you?
Nice. First of all, I would tell someone, like, I hear you, I get it. It is challenging. I completely hear you. I'm with you as well. And Mary and I have had outside conversations about this, and she'd be telling me facts about things, and I'd be like, I still am challenged by this. I think it's important to look at what you can do with it. So instead of feeling victimized or feeling like you don't have any options with this, it's like, well, what can you do? Can you remind your friends to vote and then in the election in 2 years for those elections? Can you join something to help bring more empathy to other people? Can you look for how people are empathetic around you, and even asking people, hey, where were you empathetic towards someone, or what does empathy look like in your life? Sometimes we can do this thing like, this person's not empathetic, when in reality, sometimes we need to ask them, okay, how do you show empathy? Because your version of empathy might not look like empathy to them. So I think it is reminding yourself that you can do things, and that there is actually good things that can happen when people who are elected are not empathetic. So like when President Trump was elected, I was like, this is going to be a really good thing, because it's going to mobilize a lot of people in the upcoming elections. It's going to get people who were disengaged in the process engaged. And you look at the next election, and it's the most voted in election at this point here in the US. So it's like, this is firing people up. It's made me wake up to a lot of political stuff. Like I voted, I try to vote in everything I can now. It has not always been like that, which is, I'm ashamed to say, but I think it's also important to realize that if you feel really lost and feel really at odds, or you don't believe you can change or have any power over things, then you might feel really disengaged by the voting process and feel really disengaged by politics. And I've been there, so I get that. But it's important also to remember that feelings are not facts, and that there actually are things you can do if you can get out of this mindset. And I even remember when I was in this mindset, I would look at, I would like register with, I wouldn't register, I would pick up the pieces of information that help validate that belief that, oh, I don't have any sense of power over politics, or I can't change it.
Yeah, nice. And that's exactly right. There are things that we can do, even if it's not exactly influence somebody else directly to change their mind about anything. There are still things that we have control over, that we can take some initiative on. Absolutely, for sure. And also, you know, it is good to remember, and this can be really hard in certain situations, and I know this is particularly hard for a lot of INFJs and INFPs, but the old saying, you know, there isn't something good that there isn't something bad in it, and there isn't something bad that there isn't something good that comes out of it. That is tried and true. And the more you integrate yourself, the more we integrate ourselves, we can see kind of more 360 view. Whereas instead of the usual kind of 90 degrees, first we start spreading, it keeps spreading further and further, and then we're at 180, and then all of a sudden, you know, we keep doing our integration work. A lot of my core people within students have seen this for themselves once they start to really embrace the sensor within them if they're an intuitive, or the extroversion within them if they are an introvert, or the thinking faculties if they are a feeler. That when you start to really not rely on those faculties that you're used to using, and you start opening that mind up even more, you can see the good even in the most horrific situation. And that's something that was written in The Man in Search of a Meaning, and that's a really interesting book to read. Viktor Frankl, if anybody wants to check it out. And so, but please don't anybody think that I can't feel your pain. Like if you're having a hard time with this, I have too. I have been having that too. And I'm not in any way pretending to say I'm, you know, not getting outraged, or I'm not upset, or I'm not. Obviously, you've seen me upset on this call. But there's so much more than just my associations with certain things that's going on. So I need to also respect that I don't know everything that's going on, and that my feelings can't be the only thing that I take guidance from, because if that's the case, then I'm going to live a very unsustainable life. And that's going to be tough for me. That's going to hurt me. So I need to keep a little bit of a safeguard in there, a little bit of, you know, closing that emotional fence from time to time, just so that I can bring the thoughts into being so that I can make it a bit more ordered. Nothing wrong with emotions at all, of course. Of course there isn't. But balance is something that I'm a big advocate of.
Absolutely. Beautiful.
I reckon we should leave it at that for today, because I could keep going, but we did say hard stop at half an hour. I don't know. I'm sure it's longer than half an hour at this stage. Yeah. Amelia, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate this very frank conversation. I'd love to hear what our listeners are thinking about. So please leave your comments down below in these real conversations with INFJs and INFPs. Today, of course, it's been all about politics. So, Amelia, thanks once more. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, thanks for being the person to bounce the conversation off of. This is always enlightening from my end as well.
Me too. All right, we'll see you all at the next episode of Real Conversations with INFJs and INFPs. Take care, everyone. Look after yourselves, look after your inner children, and look after each other. Stay safe. Bye.